Hello, welcome to Modern Papist. I'm Ryan,
And I'm Sean.
and today we're going to talk about Bartolome de las Casas.
Yes.
Was a bishop in the early Americas, one of the first bishops. But let Sean get into it and get right into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bartolome de las Casas, one of my favorite historical figures, honestly, ever. I've actually written a paper about him for school before, so I'm really glad to visit this topic again. So Bartolome, I believe that's Bartholomew. Would that be correct? Yeah.
I think so.
Once
I
again,
think that's the
Spanish is
Spanish
not.
equivalent. Yeah.
Yeah. Once again, Spanish is not my strong suit, so I apologize in advance for any mispronunciations of any Spanish words. I don't think we'll have too many of them, though. So, anyways, our friend Bartolome was born July 18th, I believe, of 1484. So, right before, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Yeah, we all hopefully we all learned that. That's a important rhyme for children to know. And so that's kind of the time he was born. Not too far after the Reconquista, where we kicked the Muslim Moors out of Spain, and Spain was entering into a golden age. At this point in time, you really had two rival sea powers. You had the southern sea power, which was Spain, and the northern sea power, which was England. And so, very much rivals. That's very important for the context of history and what was written in the English language about what we're going to be talking about. So we might pick up that a little later. But essentially, when he was 18, Bartolome went with his father to the New World, what is either called the West Indies or Hispaniola, which would be, I believe, modern day Cuba,
Mhm.
that area of the Caribbean. And they went because their family had what is called an encomienda. Now, an encomienda is the financial system, if you will, the fiscal system of the New World under the secular Spanish government, which
Right.
I'll describe it in best case scenario. I've heard it described such as this. Best case scenario, an encomienda was kind of a pressured agreement on the Native American people, the indigenous people, whatever is the preferred way of saying it, I suppose. But, pressure on them to pay the Spaniards with labor and gold and other resources in exchange for modern housing, kind of that, and protection. So a lot of people who would describe it as this way, which would be correct, would make the claim that Native American people did not need protection.
Right. Like that kind
That
of
way.
seems odd. Like they
It
were
kind
the.
of seems odd, but they forget to realize. So a lot of the time they did not. I will absolutely admit that. Most of the time that was kind of almost a mafia move, when the mafia protects you from the mafia. Um, but on some islands, there were tribes of known cannibals. The first island that Christopher Columbus actually landed on, there were three tribes. I do not know their names, but I do know that I believe two out of three of them were cannibals.
Right.
There was at minimum one other cannibal tribe. So at times that did matter, at times that did not. But oftentimes an encomienda was not that different from a slave trading plantation. Honestly, was very poorly treated because at this time there was kind of two views of what Native Americans were because this was still such a new concept, right?
Right.
There was one view, which was these people have a beautiful innocence to them, that it's as almost as if they bumped into the Garden of Eden, because they're naked and unashamed, and some islands are, and this goes for the whole New World. Some places you found that were very peaceful. Some were totally wrecked with war as well. But when you find a peaceful area, it does kind of seem like Garden of Eden. But that was not the most popular view. The most popular view was that these are, the word savages is often used, um, and that they need to be parented, almost like a father son, a parent-child relationship was needed.
Right.
So a lot of these people believed and that the Native Americans needed parenting, essentially. And so that's how they kind of justified putting this system on. But going back to our friend de las Casas, he went and he got his own encomienda and ran it like anyone else really would. He actually has accounts later in his life of what kind of takes place, what happens, how do you get more slaves, reports of just, killing everyone, women, children in native villages, reports of Spaniards seeing, playing games. Can we cut this person in half in one swipe? And I'm sorry for any graphic images, but just to
Right.
correctly show, just how terrible it was. So, and holding these beliefs and believing in the encomienda, our friend Bartolome became Father Bartolome de las Casas, and I believe about the year 1510.
Okay.
So 1510. He 1510. Wow, that's insane. But well, it's just like, I don't know, I find it so interesting. But it's really interesting because the Dominicans come to the Hispaniola, West Indies. So the Dominicans, or the Order of Preachers, a religious order founded by Saint Dominic in the 1300s, focused on preaching and evangelizing those who have wrong ideas about Christianity and Catholicism. And they come and they start preaching. A particular friar, Friar Antonio was his name, and he preached to at this time, Father Bartolome, and he was not having it. There was definitely a debate going back and forth, and so he took the side of pro encomienda. These people cannot govern themselves. These people, have done such a poor job with their society up till now. They need us position, and therefore we have a duty to implement an encomienda. But I love the story of Bartolome because it is a story of change and redemption, because who doesn't love that? So his mind starts to slowly to change, and I find this very true in a lot of people's religious journey, if you will, that not everyone has a St. Paul moment where God appears and knocks you off your court. It's very gradual. But there are significant moments. There are tipping points within that longer journey. And this is definitely one of them. A piece of scripture that stood out to him. So I'm going to open my Bible here.
No problem.
See, hopefully I can find it quickly enough. I believe it is Sirach 34:21 through 25. For any of our Protestant viewers, the book of Sirach is found in Catholic Bibles. So if you go looking and you have a hard time finding it, get yourself a good Catholic Bible with the deuterocanonical books. That's what the solely Catholic books are called. So let's see, verses 21 through 25. The bread of the needy, let me start that over. The bread of the needy is the life of the poor. Whoever deprives them of it is a man of blood. To take away a neighbor's living is to murder him. To deprive an employee of his wages is to shed blood. When one builds and another tears down, what do they gain but toil? When one prays and the other curses, to whose voice will the Lord listen? If a man washes after touching a dead body and touches it again, what has he gained by his washing? So sorry if that was a bad view of me from leaning over to read the Bible.
It's okay.
But that's powerful. You can really see, and I think that's a beautiful testament as the Bible, as the living word of God, because this is, BC. Obviously, it's a part of the Old Testament. And absolutely, the bread of the needy is the life of the poor. Whoever deprives them is a man of blood. Just those strong words, this whole bit.
Yeah, the imagery is really strong.
Yeah, to take away a neighbor's living is to murder him. Like, that's so strong. And you can see that's convicting. there's an act of the Holy Spirit, the spirit of conviction.
And
Yeah.
especially now, I think that would resonate with a lot of people, given
Mhm.
the COVID crisis,
Oh, absolutely. So
those
many
that have
people.
lost their jobs.
Yeah.
So
No, that's a really good point. So yes, that was Sirach 34 verses 21 through 25. If you guys want to go back and read that later, definitely suggest you do. The whole book of Sirach is fantastic. Um, so yeah, that had put in motion a conversion, and he ended up switching sides, if you will, and becoming pro non or anti encomienda, if you will.
right,
And so he did that as a priest on the island of Hispaniola in the West Indies. And he eventually had a change of heart to become a Dominican himself. So he was not ordained a Dominican priest originally. So he went back to Spain, did the novitiate for a year, and was ordained, I believe, in the 1524. No, sorry, he took Dominican vows in 1523. So at that point, he's now a Dominican, and he goes right back to follow in Father Antonio's footstep, or Friar Antonio's footsteps, and begin preaching on the evils of the encomienda with levels of success. His ministry did not bear zero fruit. In 15, I believe, the 1544 to 45 range, he was actually installed as bishop of essentially the entire New World at that point. A later large diocese would be created, but this is still so close to 1492 that
yeah, there hasn't been a lot of movement.
yeah, not because according to canon law, new land belongs to the diocese of the place where the explorers set off from.
Yeah,
And that's why people debate on whether the bishop of Orlando, Florida is technically bishop of the moon or not.
yeah, I was just actually going to bring that up.
Yeah. It's if so, that's the biggest diocese in the world, up there with I believe it's Wilmington, New Zealand, which is technically in charge of all of Antarctica,
Yeah,
or the US military archdiocese is also one of the biggest, because that's just worldwide.
right.
But that's besides the point. But he had Bartolome, now this new diocese of the New World is massive. And, there's only so much of it that he can get to logistically, but it is a massive diocese. And he just spends the rest of his life battling slavery. He's really, some people have called him the father of civil rights in the West.
Yep.
This is an official title. You have your basketball and sports titles like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So his was protectors of the Indians.
Right.
And so, Bartolome, protector of the Indians, de las Casas. A little long. It's not quite as catchy as The Rock, but it has a little more meaning. It really does, to have that, official title. And he deserved it. I firmly believe he did. He spent every moment talking about their dignity as humans, as individuals. He was also quite intelligent. He quoted Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, because he was a fellow Dominican, of course, but also because Aquinas is quite possibly the smartest man who's ever lived, in my opinion, about the natural right of man to form their own government. Aquinas was a big fan of that, the idea that not all governments are of the same value, but each individual people has the right to decide between the three, what he referred to the three good forms of government, which I believe this is a little off topic, but I believe
it's a little bit, but that's okay.
monarchy, aristocracy, and a republic. So,
right. Which you could also argue to a certain extent that the aristocracy and republic are very similar.
Yes.
So, but there is distinction. One is one, I believe, is through voting, like electing the republic. Like, obviously, you're electing someone to represent you, and then the aristocracy is lineage.
Yeah, like lineage of the many, though. There's many. Yeah. So for all those people who think that medieval Catholicism believed in nothing but the divine right of kings. That's definitely not true.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Very, very early. And so,
and we know that. I mean, if you look into how well, not Catholicism, but America got started, and the thoughts where the thought process come, it's all natural law thought. It's all ultimately derived from Thomas Aquinas, like what Locke was using.
Oh yeah,
he was getting it from Aquinas.
Yeah,
and you know, so there's this huge influence of Aquinas on the modern understanding of republic, and you know, we use all these more contemporary people, but really it's derived from him, and how he basically justified all three forms. Now they all three of them have a bad form as well, but the you know, you obviously want to go towards the good form.
Absolutely, and every society has an opportunity to choose what they see fit for them. Right. But I mention all of this because our founders did lay, as much as anti-Catholic as some of them were, they did have St. Robert Bellarmine in their library. They did have Thomas Aquinas in the library.
Right.
But as great as Benjamin Franklin and Jefferson and, you know, Monroe and Washington were with all these good things, Casas beat them to it, to establishing those ideas in the New World.
Yeah, like about 200 years.
Yeah, like that's pretty good. Like America's been around for 200 years or so.
Right.
We're like 244 at this point years old. Somewhere around there. Somewhere in between 2 and 3.
1776 to now. 40. Yeah. Yeah. 44. 244.
244. So
4th of July just happened, so definitely yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's always the thing. So sorry for that tangent for any of our non-American viewers.
The plenty of them, you know.
Yeah, there are plenty of them, absolutely. But yeah, so he was a great thinker as well. He employed that. He was a great writer. His book, or like his most famous writing, was called A Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies.
Yep.
Pretty much, you know, that's where a lot of those graphic descriptions I mentioned are. That's where, you know, a lot of the pleas that was sent back to Spain. He would actually also go back and forth to Spain quite a bit, petitioning, I believe, King Ferdinand of Spain quite a bit.
And laws would be passed, right? Like he would actually get laws passed.
Yep, and I believe in 1536, essentially, the Pope at the time essentially declared that those who held slaves, you know, would be excommunicated, essentially.
So, okay, there's a lot. That's a lot. Because, I mean, like, some people would be like, so first I'll do the comparison with the slaves.
Yeah, please do.
The idea that, all right, well, slavery now at that time was different from what Paul referenced in the Bible.
It was a different system.
It was a different type of slavery. It wasn't basically this mechanized structure that kind of, you know, went to lands and spat out a whole bunch of people who were from those lands as slaves. Like that's not what would happen. In terms of what is referenced in the Bible, that obviously did happen with everything in America, whether it's Native Americans or blacks. So obviously, like that's a problem. The other thing I wanted to bring up was so in that book, did he ever give did he ever give estimates of how many were done, and are those estimates accurate in lieu of like history with what we know now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So he did give estimates. I unfortunately do not have the numbers in front of me, but they were quite high, and that's quite possibly because so many people did die from the system. Like the system kill you. If you see the artwork, it shows them, you know, tying people by their wrists and lighting a fire under them, like brutal stuff. However, a lot of the deaths, and some people actually don't like it when you bring this up, but you have to because of how factually correct it is disease.
Right.
Disease. They did not have immunity. The Native American people, they did not have immunity to Western diseases. And so a lot of those people who were in the system who would not have died of cruelty normally did die of disease, and Bartolome, not being versed in advanced germ theory, which would not be around for 200 more years, so you can't blame the guy, would count that as a death of brutality.
Right.
So the numbers might not be particularly accurate, not because of dishonesty, but just because of, understandable ignorance.
Right. And so, okay, that's pretty good. Now, I guess in terms of the Indian slaves,
Mhm.
Native American slaves, he did he ever comment about black slavery, or was that something where he would once advocated for and then switched, or like was it something like how he did with the Indian, like Native? I say Indians because of the title, but
Yeah.
the Native Americans, um, what in that relationship, how'd that happen? How what went through his mind?
Okay. So this is kind of how it went. It takes some context, but at this time, Europe was partaking in some black slavery for two reasons. One reason is this is actually what's considered traditional European slavery, air quotations. Now, I guess it would be the traditional, would be prisoners of war. It was never race-based.
Right.
So it was just if you fought a country, you took prisoners, now you have them as slaves, because if you release them, they'll fight you again, essentially. And so Europe did have black slaves from skirmishes with Africa, but at this point, I believe they were just taking slaves, unfortunately. Bartolome did at one point say or suggest to the New World that since the Native Americans were dying in such large numbers, and once again, this is from primarily disease, he noticed that black slaves did not die. And so he, unfortunately, because of his time, did not make the connection with disease. He just thought that the African people were quote unquote hardier, like they just were tougher, I suppose.
Gotcha.
And so, in an act of mercy towards the Indians, he suggested the use of black slavery. Of course, I am not justifying that. I do want to show that after his conversion, and even before, the man was a man of some principles his whole life. Like, even when he was totally in the wrong, he was still trying to help people out as a priest. Actually, I take that back. But many people become priests. Most people become priests because they want to be a good person. But I guess what I'm getting at is, once again, not too many people just have one moment of clarity and then they're good for the rest of their lives. It's a process. And if you read the writings he has from later in his life, after he condoned black slavery, you get like this really strong feeling of disappointment he has in himself. And I believe the phrase he used was, "If my God was anything but infinitely merciful, I myself would have no chance of salvation."
Right.
He acknowledged himself and believed himself, quite like St. Paul, that he was the least of the apostles.
And so, okay, just to clarify, because I think, because I really want to make this evident and clear. So towards the end of his life, he went back on what he said about black slavery, and I disagree with slavery at all. Like, that is just something we're not supposed to do whatsoever.
Yes, that is.
I just want to make that clear that that's what the conclusion was. Because it's just because some people are going to be like, well, he still kind of supported black slavery, even though he's kind of disappointed. It's like, no, like at the end of his life, he was against all forms of slavery.
Yeah, and when I say end of his life, I don't mean old and on his deathbed. I just mean later. I don't have the exact date because people's minds don't change in an instant.
Well, like when he was bishop,
gradual.
When he was bishop, though, he had these feelings, didn't he? Like, or what? Like when he, as he was becoming bishop, because that was after he had gone back and forth with the state, right?
Sorry, are you asking if he held his?
Yeah, I'm asking if these are like, was it did they change before he was bishop or after he was bishop?
I believe they changed after he was bishop. Don't quote me on that. I do not know.
Okay. I mean,
100%.
Because okay.
Yeah.
All right. So did he? I guess in regards to, because I know a lot of people now will look at Christopher Columbus and say, Christopher Columbus, was a conquistador, even though he wasn't. He was this person who really wanted to enslave the New World. For someone like Bartolome, how did he view Christopher Columbus, and how did he view Christopher Columbus?
Yeah. So Christopher Columbus is a really interesting case with this because I'm a big fan of a little subsection of history referred to as historiography, which means you study how people study history, the study of history.
Yep.
And that's important because when we talk about Columbus modern day, there are two and more three main sources of Columbus. Columbus's own writings, but I believe his most famous journal, the original copy is gone. And I believe so. A lot of the stuff that he wrote down was preserved by Casas in his writings. But then there's Christopher Columbus's own writings.
Yep.
Bartolome de las Casas's writings, and the writings of Francisco Bobadilla. Bobadillo, not And Francisco Bobadillo was his chief political rival. Now, we use the chief political rival as our main source for Columbus, which is very much not fair. I know one analogy used for this is, what if we had Donald Trump writing for Hillary Clinton's history, or vice versa? What if we only had Hillary Clinton's view on Donald Trump as history? Yeah, either way, it would be super biased. Oh, absolutely. And you can do that for any two set of, Obama, Romney, Bush, Gore, any of that. Trudeau, Harper,
Burr and Hamilton.
Burr and Hamilton, yeah. Throw out some different times, different countries, So, absolutely. So, I'm not saying that those writings have no merit, but you do have to understand that this is a man who was trying to tear down Columbus. Now, if you look at Bartolome de las Casas's writings, and who has no particular vested interest in either protecting or destroying his reputation or uplifting his reputation, he's not involved with that. His sole purpose in life at this point is to save the native peoples from terrible encomienda.
Right.
He's a huge fan. Now, some people will take quotes of corrections. He does correct Columbus at times, because Columbus was not a perfect man in and of himself. But he definitely has much more positive things to say about him, and less negative things. He praises him. He praises him for adopting a son who just happened to be Native American.
Right.
So he is a fan, and so that it really kind of justifies the case for Columbus.
Right, because it seems really weird that if anybody had to really have issue with what was going on in context of what was going on at the time, instead of 200 years later and looking at with certain lenses, certain agendas, certain whatever, that this would be the man to use as kind of like a post of, all right, well, how did he view Columbus, given that he hates all the crap that's happening to the native peoples?
Yeah.
How he's spent literally a good portion of his life defending them, not just immediately, locally, but to the Spanish government. So, the fact that you're saying this and that, what you said that, did he write his diary or something, or what other writings did he do?
So I did mention the a short account of the destruction of the Indies, but I'm just saying that he wrote about a few of the things Columbus did that were lost because we lost a few manuscripts of Columbus's writings.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
We didn't lose the entirety of Columbus's works. That is mostly still there. Thank goodness.
Okay, so I mean, I guess again, I guess what I'm just trying to say is like this guy would be someone you would want to look to see a favorable or unfavorable opinion of Columbus in light of everything that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
That he would be kind of this objective viewpoint, living in the time that this was all happening.
Absolutely. And I think that's ironic for my history. And this is, I'm just going to throw, this is a little bit of a tangent, but my history professor, when he was explaining the idea of bias, the only one, and I've taken more than one class with him, so he uses, I found out he uses this consistently. For him, the like most obvious form of bias is a monk writing the history of the Catholic Church, and he just doesn't seem that people who write, who are particularly religious, are trustworthy, which is a shame, because if you look at this situation, it seems that the secular authority is the one who has particularly vested interest in telling less than truth, and it's our bishop friend who seems to
Right.
be in the more accurate account.
And I think that's a very, I mean, I would assume, obviously I'm not a historian, but it seems like that's the assumption from a lot of people is that, well, the religious are biased and the secular is the objective source. But I mean, we see throughout history
Yeah.
that, like, all right, so like Spain here is the secular government.
Yeah.
They're not being run by the church. Obviously, there is a certain relationship with the Pope there, but they're not being run by the Pope.
Yep.
And so what they do is for their own vested interest, and their own vested interest is not always Catholic. And I think that distinction just throughout history needs to be made from like literally the Crusades on. Because
Absolutely.
have completely lost that understanding of, just because they say that they're a Catholic country doesn't mean they're actually acting in Catholic principles.
Absolutely.
Or yeah. So
yeah, no, absolutely. And so what I mentioned earlier is a lot of what's written down in the English language about this time in history was written by the British and the Dutch. And so the Dutch, you have the whole Habsburg family empire. They, rule over the, parts of what are now Germany, the Netherlands, Spain. Like they have this whole empire throughout Europe. So the Dutch are currently openly rebelling against Spain. And the English, remember I mentioned that those two are the main sea rivals. They're like the world powers at this time.
right.
England is trying to find just as much gold as Spain. It's just that there's much more, much more gold in the Latin Americas than there is in Nova Scotia, which is where they were at this time, like northern Canada.
Yeah.
And so those two had very much particular interest as painting the secular Spanish government and the Catholic Church in the most negative light possible.
Right.
And so a lot of the sources from this time that are written in English, or Dutch for that matter, Germanic languages, let's say.
I mean,
once again, you have to take with a huge grain of salt. And I really wish I could read Spanish and French so I could really I can read translations. So.
And this is also when the Reformation or rebellion is happening.
Oh yeah,
within the Christian church, because I mean Martin Luther, 1517, like yeah. So I mean, like there's all this turmoil going on, religiously and politically, because the two are intertwined at this time in history.
Oh yeah, Protestantism, I do not think would have ever been prevalent if they did not convince people that Catholic kingdoms were evil. If they did not convince that Catholic churchmen, but even, nobility and Catholic governments were bad. And so that was a huge part of it. Political propaganda, religious propaganda against this powerful Catholic nation and what they're doing. And of course, not perfect. Encomienda was very bad. But if you read purely Anglo-centric sources, it will not be accurate. So read some, Espanol-centric sources as well.
Right. So, okay. And this is also where the secularism comes into play too, where it's not being, they themselves have a bias. It just happens to be a different form of secularism because you're talking about a different entity, which is a different country.
Yeah.
So it's not, whereas like a Catholic, so like if you had a Catholic monk, and I can't think of an example, but I would assume this is the case. If you have a Catholic monk in England who actually, who follows the church, and then you have a Catholic monk in Spain who follows the church, and they're talking about the same thing, what you're going to miss is primarily cultural.
Yes.
And not like you really shouldn't be seeing this bias of the state or whatever. I mean, if you're seeing a bias of the state, that's suggesting that the state, there's probably a compromise of the faith with the state in terms of the person writing it, but then that's going a little too deep into something I don't really know about. You would know more about it than I would, because I don't study that. So that's just me as a lay person looking at history, like my assumptions. All right, so I guess the other another thing I wanted to bring up was, I know there was a lot of I think it was in the 70s and 80s, 1970s and 80s, where liberation theology was becoming very prevalent in Latin America and in America to some degree. And Bartolome was being used as kind of this poster boy, as, hey, look at him. He was for liberation theology. Like, is that the case, or is that exaggerated to fit an agenda? How would you go about describing that circumstance?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So it's funny. They will say that Bartolome was a kind of part of that group, but they also define the group as starting in the 1970s. So it's a little bit of a disconnect.
Right.
Who was the liberation theologian, if that's the proper term? It was Gustav. I know his first name is Gustav. So I'm just going to call him Gustav. If you type in liberation theology, Gustav, his last name will pop up, I guarantee you. So our boy Gustav, he was 1973 was when he published his first book. Really, like, that's kind of the official start of liberation theology. And so I'll just briefly kind of summarize what it is so I can better explain it, and explain Bartolome's relationship to it. Liberation theology is essentially a Marxist takeover of Catholic teaching. It's the idea that Jesus came primarily to liberate the poor from governmental oppression and from earthly poverty. And so it's very much a proletariat bourgeoisie relationship, the rich and the poor, and Jesus came primarily to, reverse that and kind of put the poor on top. It kind of misinterprets a lot of what the saints say as well. When St. Basil the Great said, the extra shoes you have in your house belong to the poor, he meant that it's your duty as a Christian to give them your shoes, your extra shoes. He did say that, and he is correct. St. Vincent de Paul, champion of the poor, said very similar things. The food you have in excess belongs to the poor.
Right.
But they take those words and mean, okay, so we need to have a violent revolution and install a particular Marxist government to take that from you instead of your Christian duty. And so that's the goal. They want to create fantastic social programs to help the poor via violent revolution. And, Christ taught that, or as they say, Christ taught that, the poor are to be helped above all, not the salvation of souls, not holiness, not be perfect as I am perfect. And so that's kind of the thing. If this was around when St. Paul was around, I feel like he would have had to write, there's no, Gentile, nor Jew, no servant, no free, nor proletariat, nor bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
That's definitely a modern trend.
He just said the rich and the poor. So, I mean, there is no rich and the poor. So I guess it's more the established classes.
Yeah, established classism.
Yeah, so that's kind of weird. Yeah, because like he seems like he's just at the end of the day, Bartolome seems like he's someone who had this phenomenon of coming into a new world, had his prejudices challenged, and over time overturned those challenges and apologized for his beliefs that he once held, and just being a Dominican follower. Like, he was just someone who was trying to do his best with what God gave him.
Absolutely.
and
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 so, yeah,
not and not simply look at the carnal or the material life of people. And because obviously there's more than that. He evangelized. I
oh
would
yeah.
assume. I know you didn't say that, but just a
Mhm.
brief look. I mean, you don't become a bishop, especially then, just because you're a good priest.
Absolutely. What's it? He was very much influential in reminding people that you can't just put them in an encomienda and force them to convert. But he never unemphasized the importance of conversion.
Right.
He understood that it's requirement to be free, like you need to consent. But at the same time, he never relented in evangelizing the native people, which Thomas Aquinas defines, fellow Dominican, that's the highest form of charity, is bringing souls to Christ.
Right.
But so he never, so that was very much a word salad on my part. But summary, he did not advertise classism. He did not say there is the poor class of natives and these, and God came particularly for the poor, and so that we need a violent revolution to uproot. And many modern liberation theologians will not say revolution, or will not call for violent revolution anymore, but they did in the 60s and 70s. And yeah, so he just didn't preach that. He preached the kingdom of God and the salvation of souls, not the kingdom of man and good social programs.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's all right. That's pretty good. I guess, is there anything else you want to talk about, or
Um,
I don't have any more questions.
no, I do want one more thing. So
Okay.
I love Bartolome de las Casas. I think he is such a good example of conversion. I believe so. We live in a culture, people talk about cancel culture all the time.
Oh yeah, there's a huge push right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely, for everything. And so Bartolome would be canceled because of his past tweets against,
Oh
for
yeah.
slavery. Absolutely. In his time, if he lived there. And so we as Catholics, we as Christians are called to forgive, because those who do not forgive will not be forgiven. Christ explicitly says that in the scriptures. And so even,
not to mention, you really can't say the Our Father without the part in the Our Father where it says, crap, I can't.
It's like the ABCs. You can't just jump in.
Yeah, I gotta like say the whole thing in my head now. But
as we forgive those who trespass against us.
Yeah, and you can't hold that. If you can't say that honestly, you can't say the Our Father.
Absolutely.
And so that ends up becoming an issue too. And most people don't even recognize that. But
yeah. And so I just want to say, yes, you need to forgive him, but, and this goes for so many people of the great past, don't put anyone in particular in my mouth, viewers, but I am going to say that he is a greater man than all of us. He has done more to stop racism than will ever do. Then, no offense, Ryan, but I think he's done more to stop racism than you have as of yet.
I mean, none taken.
Yeah. And so, viewers, he has done more to stop racism than you. So please forgive him and acknowledge how great of a person he is for overcoming that. You don't have to have a personal devotion to him, but and this is just a broader theme amongst historians right now, and for people like me, is, we were born on third base, and we think we hit a triple. We are built on the work. We acknowledge slavery is bad in the society because of Bartolome and people like him. It's because of him that we can act superior to him 400 years later. It's
right.
Kind of what I'm saying.
I always find that to be odd, because it's one thing, because I mean, you can relate that to abortion now.
Oh, absolutely.
Where 200 years from now, where we hopefully grow out of it.
Yeah.
They point back, hey, this politician was for abortion. Why would you use that person as an example? Well, it's because in other things they may have done really good things, and they just may not have thought about abortion as hard, at certain times. Not to say to diminish that at all. Obviously, like, abortion is a terrible, terrible thing, and you should always vote against it. But I'm gonna just add that there for the 2020 election. But so it's there are things now that we currently deal with that we don't look at it the same way as we do with 2020 vision.
Yeah.
And because we are living in it, like, that's just the nature of living. Like, that's.
Yeah. So let me see if this is what you're getting at. Though the way I might word that is, be kind to historical figures and people in the past, because people in the future might not treat you the same. Or
right.
so,
like,
yeah.
Like, I can think of a bunch of things right now where, like, Twitter, people who are on Twitter, and they just go relentlessly after who. Doesn't even matter what industry you're in. You know, whether you're in, like, card games, whether you're in the church, whether you're in politics, whether you're in pretty much anything, like video games, people, like, are going to look back at you and say you act like a child.
Yeah.
Like, because you're getting uptight about something that ultimately just doesn't matter. Yeah, I don't know. That's just.
Yeah. So be nice to history, or history will not be nice to you. That's what I'm saying.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, we're all born on the shoulders. Well, not born, but we stand on the shoulders of giants, and we think we're flying. And I think we need to realize we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Yep. So that's all I had to say, particularly. Yeah.
Okay, good. I think this was really eye-opening for me, because, like, I didn't really know that much about Bartolome of the houses, and if that's
English translation, Bartholomew of the houses,
and he's definitely someone that I definitely admire, especially with all the active work that he did after recognizing, really more realizing the problems. And so I'm very glad you brought him up, because I guess the next person we're going to be doing is Columbus, right?
Yes, we can talk about Columbus, absolutely, because that's very topical.
Right.
The Columbus thing.
And things are happening right now about things and stuff.
Yep.
So okay, I'll okay. So.
Ooh, one more thing. What's it? Sorry. People have been calling for a cause of canonization to be opened. I believe that started at like 85, like back in the day. So right. Because it took so long for his conversion to complete, and he is historically divisive, it's already taken like 400 years at this point to get to where we are. I'm not sure if it's my point to say whether I want him to be canonized. I want him to be canonized if the church believes he's deserving of it, if he's truly in heaven. But just an FYI, people are thinking about it. So,
do you know of any miracles that have happened, or
no approved miracles as of yet? No approved. Maybe he did, but they just were never approved. I don't know, but nothing of it as of yet.
Okay.
If you guys want to pray for his canonization, go for it. Like, if you feel called to that, go for it. Honestly, I would not be angry.
Huh? Are you gonna do that, Sean?
Probably, yeah. I think he's.
But no, that's a good thing that because like it's not like every single saint takes like 5 years to do, like Saint Teresa or Saint Pope John Paul II. Like that's very irregular.
Yeah.
Like even Thomas More took like I think 300 years or 200.
Yeah, and he's like an obvious one. Like
and he was very divisive.
I guess, yeah, at the time.
So but like we're talking about a prince of the church that was basically one of the first bishops in the New World. It would seem fitting, but obviously I can't declare him to be in heaven. Yeah. So
I don't feel qualified to declare him or not. But
yeah.
I wouldn't.
Okay, so before we go too much off case, if you like this, please like and subscribe, because I need to say that, because I don't know where else to say that in this whole thing.
Heck yeah, what's it?
We appreciate you coming to watch this. We're sorry we haven't been here for a while. It's just things have come up. So
it's been a crazy time.
Yeah. But besides that, I hope you enjoyed this, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah. Have a good day, guys. Signing off.